But right now, I'm told we're able to go across to the Accra International Conference Center, where the final funeral rites of Kofi Annan are taking place. My colleagues Mamabi and Roland are giving us the program lineup and the commentary on the dignitaries who have arrived so far. Let's join them now.
Mr. Kofi Annan, the global icon that we've been celebrating, a man who died 18th of August 2018, finally buried today. And for the past 2 days, we know that his body has been here. And on the first day, people generally came here to pay their last respects. On Wednesday, we saw a lot more. Here to pay their last respects. On Wednesday, we saw a lot more of ministers and heads of government institutions and the political parties coming by. Today is actually the final day. Today is the burial service and final interment. Service will commence at exactly 9 a.m. here at the Accra International Conference Center, and the service is being attended by UN officials, heads of state, diplomatic missions. We've seen the former president, John Mahama, come through a while ago. We've also seen the former vice president, the late Mr. Arthur's wife, also come through here. See the president also come through, but the service itself will begin at 9 a.m. Lots of dignitaries stepping in, and we will shortly see exactly what's happening at the foyer. But So we're live here on Joy News. It's our coverage of the burial service, the final burial service of Mr. Kofi Annan, a global icon, a man who used to be in charge at the UN as UN Secretary General. And many have said, how do we celebrate a man who really, did everything? How do we finally send him off? We're seeing people coming by, pay their last respect, and then the service will also be underway. Just quickly run you through what to expect by way of order of service, which will begin at exactly 9 a.m. when the president arrives. We will see tributes being shared. Before that, we will get a biography of Mr. Kofi Annan. Tributes will be shared from family, from his children, from his wife, and from other persons as well. We'll hear from the United Nations Secretary General as well, the President of the Republic, and a sermon will be delivered by Most Reverend Dr. J.O. Akrofi. We will see the Winneba Youth Choir also perform. But right now we're seeing more dignitaries arrive here at the Accra International Conference Center. Roland Walker is on standby. I'll bring him in. And as and when we do find people who are coming through, we're going to just run by you the people who are stepping in here at the Accra International Conference Center. It's just some 9 minutes after 8 a.m. So a little under an hour and the service will be underway. In the meantime, we're still seeing dignitaries coming in for the service this morning. A short while ago, we saw former President John Dramani Mahama accompanied by his spokesperson come through, and then we did also see wife of the late Emisa Arthur also come through here at the Accra International Conference Center. So Roland, I'm just running through some of the persons that I've seen. John Dramani Mahama, I wonder who you spotted.
I've spotted a number of dignitaries. Former Minister of Education under the erstwhile Kufuor administration, Elizabeth Ohene, also has been through. We have the High Commissioner of Canada to Ghana. We have emissaries also coming from traditional areas or locations in Nigeria, the Gambia, and a number of dignitaries across the world. Today is a day, as we know, that has been set aside to finally commence getting the body of the former Secretary General of the UN to the next world. And we know that we had started some host of celebrations before we got to this point. But appropriately also, it is a dignifying one, an event that has rightfully been organized by the government of Ghana in collaboration with the UN and other related partners or agencies. And if you speak to a number of the dignitaries who are coming here, they are elated because they want to be part of the whole process to make sure that they give him a befitting farewell.
I think one of the things that has also been asked, and I know what especially the committee was trying to figure out and see exactly how they're going to do it, is how to coordinate the arrival of these dignitaries, because we have lots of them coming in today, obviously because of who Kofi Annan was, what he did. And so we have lots of people coming by, and they wanted to be on point with the arrival, because you don't want to have too many people, crowded at one point. And it looks like coordination, certainly, at least what we've seen, seems to be on points.
Yes, we've been following up with a number of activities now. The last one was the funeral here of the former Vice President of our Republic, Kwesi Emisa Arthur, and we saw how poignantly it was coordinated, and today has been so. And it looks like they've beefed up with a lot more security. The police have also complemented the efforts of the military, and so we have it appropriately well coordinated.
Yeah. And as we speak to you live here on Joy News, and as you watch the arrival of dignitaries coming through for the burial service of the late Kofi Annan at the Accra International Conference Center, let me also just quickly run by you some of the things that Kofi Annan did when he was alive, at least what other persons remember him for. He was often asked to intercede in crisis, sometimes as an impartial independent mediator, sometimes as a special envoy of the international community. And in recent years, he's provided such counsel to Burkina Faso, to Kenya, to Myanmar, Senegal, Syria, Iraq, and Colombia. He also participated in problem-solving missions for the elders, as they are referred to, and other organizations of which he was a part of. So a man of many colors, indeed a man who stood for peace. And we've heard persons share what they feel that we've lost as a nation and as a world. And hardly do people even refer him as Ghanaian. It's really other way to describe him.
Yes, he's a great international figure, and if you look at the number of plethora of people who have not only commented following his passing, but also have made their presence felt here, it gives you the indication of the magnitude of the impact he had in his role, and more appropriately, somebody who has impacted the world in many ways that are uncountable, that we can't quantify, influence many lives, not only personally, but also countries, societies, and families.
Absolutely. Live at the National Conference Center is our coverage of the final.
There's a lot more to come from the Accra International Conference Center, where Roland and Mamabi are standing by with commentary and interviews of the dignitaries who are arriving for the big ceremony. But before we go back to them, let's remind ourselves of the reason why today is so special. Here is a feature put together by JoyNews on the life of the man, Kofi Annan.
The world that I'm working to create is a world that should be of interest to all of us. I'm working to create a world that is stable, that is peaceful, where we as human beings realize that we cannot consume the resources of the world the way we are doing, as if there is no tomorrow.
That's the man, Kofi Annan, declaring his vision for the world, a vision to protect the dignity of humanity.
The farmer knows instinctively that if you take something from the earth today, you have to put something back to be able to return to harvest tomorrow. Somehow, when we move to the city, we lose that instinct. We need to create a world that is equitable, that is stable, and a world where we bear in mind the needs of others and not only what we need immediately.
But this vision about the world seems to have started a long time ago, here in Ghana, West Africa. Kofi Annan was born on April 8, 1939 in Kumasi, Ghana, to an elite family. His father, Henry Reginald Anashanti, and his mother, Victoria Annan Efante. Kofi Annan attended Asim Boys Junior Secondary School and later, in 1953, the Infantipim Senior Secondary School, Cape Coast, where his future as a diplomat will be crafted. In this documentary, we speak to schoolmates, friends, co-workers, and family members looking back on the life of the man who, until his death, wowed the world with his exemplary leadership style. Kofi Annan Secondary School in Infantipim was founded by British Methodist missionaries in 1876. And here is where many of the stories about Mr. Annan's political leadership, fun and pun, started.
At school, there was nothing to distinguish Kofi from any other child in the school.
Dr. Andrew Anane Akutu, a retired civil servant at the UN, was Mr. Annan's schoolmate at Infantipim. He remembers so vividly their time on campus back in the day.
Kofi's main thing, as I recall, is that he was a very good athlete, that he was a very good sprinter. And later on, I learned when he went to the States and so on, he was even competing in the States as a sprinter.
While on campus, Kofi Annan was deeply involved in the political leadership, becoming the opposition leader of the mock parliamentary elections of Infantipim. That earned him the nickname Domo.
From mock political parties and elected members to assemblies and so on. And Kofi was elected the deputy leader of the opposition. And in those days, opposition people were called generally Domo. So Kofi acquired the nickname Domo. Up till his passing, among some close friends, we called him Domo.
And this was at a time the Gold Coast was working to seek independence from Britain, a time of increased optimism about Ghana's political future led by Ghanaians. Under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, a movement for independence was gaining ground, and by 1957, Ghana had become the first British African colony to gain independence.
You may remember that during those middle 50s, most children at secondary schools and everything, we were all highly aware of the political activities and movements that were taking place in and around us at the national, regional level. And so, growing up in Kumasi, he could not possibly have missed he could not have been unaware of the political movements there between the Kwame Nkrumah's movement and the Ashanti, this thing for separation, regional division, and so on.
But this active involvement in politics on campus would not translate into dabbling in politics at the national level. This is why the legendary former headmaster of Infantipim, F.L. Bartels, would not allow his students to join the political movement. He's a man who would influence a generation. F.L. Bartels instilled in his students greater discipline. Ambassador Patrick Hayford was Director for Regional and African Affairs in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General. As an old boy of Infantipim himself, Ambassador Hayford believes the influence of F.L. Bartels helped shape the character of Kofi Annan.
And he was a wonderful educationist who helped to instill these values of discipline and honesty and integrity, but above all, public service. He helped to instill this in his students, including in Mr. Kofi Annan. And Mr. Annan often spoke of the influence of Mr. F.L. Bartels.
One of Kofi Annan's noticeable achievements at Infantipim was to lead a protest against poor quality of food in the dining hall.
He happened to be the leader of a small group of students who were protesting perhaps more loudly than others. And this came to the notice of the headmaster, Bartels.
F.L. Bartels then called him to his office and said, "I understand you had something to do with all the strike nonsense. If you have an issue to discuss, come to me and we'll discuss it man to man. You are reasonably intelligent. Given the chance, you may become a useful member of society." That was the prophecy. Kofi would then work towards translating this into reality. He left Infantipim after F.L. Bartels failed to promote him to sixth form because Mr. Annan's performance was not stellar. Kofi later entered the new Kumasi Institute of Science and Technology, a British-operated technical college. Here too, his instinctive sense of leadership would make him the president of the Ghana National Students' Union. During a visit to Sierra Leone, he was spotted by executives of the Ford Foundation on a talent scout. In 1959, Kofi Annan studied at the McAllister College, a small liberal arts college in St. Paul, Minnesota. At McAllister, Mr. Annan was easily noticeable. He was a good debater and delivered various speeches about the need for the West to support Africa, a continent trying to pull itself out of the woods. After McAllister, Kofi Annan joined the United Nations in 1962 and would make his way upward through the system. His specialties included people management, a skill his friend and former director for Africa and Regional Affairs in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General, Ambassador Hayford, says Mr. Annan demonstrated strongly while in Infantipim.
Infantipim has a long and proud tradition of public service. We were all taught and encouraged to go into public service because it was a duty. And I think it came out of the Christian Methodist ethos, that we are here not for ourselves, but to serve others and the Almighty.
But the skill and his expertise in budgeting were vital at the UN. He had to stay in Geneva, and it was during this period in Geneva that Kofi Annan would find love. A few months after their 1965 wedding, the Annans returned to Africa after he took a post as an administrative officer in the personnel section of the UN Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The UN transferred Annan back to Geneva as an administrative management officer in August 1972. Annan changed career and returned to Ghana, but left 2 years later to the United Nations. In 15 years of marriage, he had moved for work or study from Geneva to Addis Ababa to New York to Addis Ababa to Cambridge to Addis Ababa to Accra, Ismailia, and New York, a situation that complicated his marriage. The couple would later separate and divorce. In 1981, Annan met Swedish lawyer Nan at a friend's party in Geneva. Nan was working at the UNHCR, Annan's new workplace. After the divorce from Titi was finalized, Kofi married Nan, with whom he moved to New York. Kofi Annan became the Under-Secretary General in charge of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations after a stellar performance at the UN.
He had become someone whom world leaders across the board respected, admired, and somebody who was looked to in a world where there are so many problems, so many challenges. He used to say problems without passports. There are so many problems in the world today that no one country, no one leader can tackle.
On January 2, 1997, Kofi Annan assumed the role of Secretary General of the United Nations.
I, Kofi Annan.
I, Kofi Annan.
Solemnly swear.
Solemnly swear.
To exercise in all loyalty.
To exercise in all loyalty.
Discretion and conscience.
Discretion and conscience.
The functions entrusted to me.
The functions entrusted to me.
As Secretary General of the United Nations.
As Secretary General of the United Nations.
To discharge these functions.
To discharge these functions.
And regulate my conduct.
And regulate my conduct.
With the interest.
With the interest.
Of the United Nations only in view.
Of the United Nations only in view.
He was the 7th Secretary General of the UN in his 52 years, the first black African to occupy the position and the first to rise from the ranks of the UN Secretariat.
Because of his own personality, because of his own approach, very gentle, very courteous, but also very determined. People forget. Beneath that gentle personality, there was a lot of steel, there was a lot of strength and determination and tenacity in what he did.
In 2001, in its centennial year, the Nobel Committee decided that the Peace Prize was to be divided between the United Nations and Kofi Annan.
And the diploma.
Annan was awarded the Peace Prize for having revitalized the UN and for having given priority to human rights. But Mr. Annan came at a time the United States of America was poised to remove Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein, a man the U.S. considered a brutal dictator hoarding weapons of mass destruction.
My fellow citizens, events in Iraq have now reached the final days of decision. For more than a decade, the United States and other nations have pursued patient and honorable efforts to disarm the Iraqi regime without war.
Annan flew to Baghdad in attempts to find a peaceful resolution.
It's been a long time, and I'm now back in Baghdad on a very important mission. In fact, I describe it as a sacred duty.
But the U.S. would not wait and defied UN caution against waging war on Iraq. Kofi Annan described the war as illegal and would draw criticism from the U.S.
Also on the Iraq front, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan had some stinging words for the United States. In an interview with the BBC, Annan said that the U.S.-led force did not have the legal authority to invade the country.
Very difficult moment for the international civil servant, challenging a superpower, albeit in a diplomatic manner. Those were skills that made Mr. Annan largely successful at the UN, says Ambassador Hayford, a man who worked in his cabinet.
He tended to choose people who were up to the task. Let me put it that way. And it's another thing he achieved. He brought a number of former heads of state to senior positions in his team. And that helped to raise the profile. Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland. He brought several other former heads of state to very high-level positions. And by the way, the current Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, was selected by Kofi Annan when Kofi Annan was Secretary General to be High Commissioner for Refugees. And it's a measure of the quality of Kofi Annan's choice that the world has now put him in place as the new Secretary General of the United Nations.
What will you say was his role regarding the MDGs?
Well, he was front and center. The Millennium Summit was orchestrated and convened by him. And because of his own person and the respect, admiration, and support he had from the entire membership of the UN, everybody, all the world leaders were there. President Clinton, the US president at the time, came. The Chinese leadership were there. The Russian, across the board, leaders from all parts of the world came for the Millennium Summit. That's what made it special.
The MDGs were the 8 international development goals for the year 2015 that had been established following the Millennium Summit of the United Nations in 2000, when Kofi Annan was Secretary General. All 191 UN member states at the time, and at least 22